Asterisk the desert wind carried dust and whispers of cruelty that morning when Thomas Whitfield first saw her. She was tied to the old oak tree at the crossroads, her blue dress torn and faded. A rough wooden sign hanging round her neck like a cruel yoke. The words burned into the wood were simple and heartless. Useless mouth. Asterisk Thomas had been riding this same path to town for 23 years. He knew every rock, every bend, every shadow that the mesa cast across the red earth. But he had never seen anything quite like this. A young woman, barely past 20, left alone in the vastness of the Arizona territory like discarded baggage. Asterisk her dark hair hung in tangled waves round her face, and even from a distance he could see the exhaustion etched in her features. She wasn't crying, perhaps she had no tears left. She simply stared out at the horizon with the hollow look of someone who had given up hope. Asterisk Thomas was not a man of many words. Never had been. His neighbors in Cedar Ridge knew him, the quiet rancher who kept to himself, worked his land with steady hands, and spoke only when necessary. Some folks thought him unfriendly. Others understood that silence could be its own form of kindness. Asterisk he dismounted his horse slowly, his boots crunching on the desert floor. The woman's eyes met his, and he saw something there that reminded him of the wild horses he sometimes found caught in wire fences, injured, frightened, but still possessing a spark of life that refused to die. Asterisk ma'am, he said simply, touching the brim of his hat. Asterisk she tried to speak, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. Water. Asterisk Thomas reached for his canteen without hesitation. He held it to her lips gently, letting her drink slowly. Years of caring for injured animals had taught him patience. Some things couldn't be rushed. Asterisk as she drank. He examined the ropes that bound her to the tree. They were tied with the kind of angry knots that spoke of rage and rejection. Someone had wanted to make sure she couldn't free herself. Someone had wanted her to suffer. Asterisk who did this to you? He asked quietly. Asterisk she closed her eyes. My husband's family. After he died, they said I was. She gestured weakly to the sign round her neck. They said I had no use, no children to show for 3 years of marriage. Just another mouth to feed. Asterisk Thomas had heard stories like this before. Hard times made some people harder, and when crops failed or cattle died, families sometimes looked for someone to blame. Too often, it was the women who bore the brunt of that blame. Asterisk he began working on the knots, his weathered fingers patient and sure. Well, he said after a long moment, seems to me like whoever left you here doesn't know much about what's useful and what isn't. Asterisk the ropes fell away, and she rubbed her wrists where they had chafed raw. Thomas stepped back, giving her space. He had learned long ago that trust was something that grew slowly, like the desert flowers that bloomed only after patient years of waiting. Asterisk and Thomas Whitfield, he said, I have a ranch about 5 miles from here. You're welcome to rest there, if you need to. Asterisk she looked at him with surprise. In her experience, strangers didn't offer kindness without expecting something in return. I don't have anything to give you, she said quietly. Asterisk didn't ask for anything, Thomas replied. He helped her to her feet, noting how she swayed slightly from exhaustion and hunger. Sometimes folks just need a place to catch their breath. Asterisk her name was Sarah Beth Morrison, and she told him her story in pieces over the weeks that followed. How she had married young to a man who was kind but weak. How his family had barely tolerated her, watching her belly for signs of new life that never came. How, when fever took her husband that past winter, they had decided she was a burden they could no longer bear. Asterisk Thomas listened without judgment. He had his own stories of loss, a wife who had died giving birth to a son who lived only 3 days. leaving him alone in a house that had once rung with laughter and plans for the future. He understood how grief could hollow out a person, leaving empty spaces that seemed impossible to fill. Sarah Beth proved anything but useless. She had gentle hands with the animals, a keen eye for which plants could be used for healing, and a way of making the simple meals they shared feel like small celebrations. She mended his shirts with tiny, careful stitches, organized his cluttered barn, and slowly brought life back to the flower garden his wife had started behind the house. But it was the small moments that mattered most. The way she would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the mesa walls gold and purple. How she would hum softly while she worked, old songs that reminded him of his mother. The quiet conversations they shared over morning coffee, speaking of everything and nothing with the easy comfort of old friends. You know. Sarah Beth said one evening as they sat watching the stars emerge. I spent so many years trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided I had none. I forgot that worth isn't something you earn. It's something you simply have, by virtue of being human. Thomas nodded. My mother used to say that every person is like a book. Some folks only read the cover and think they know the whole story. But the real treasure is inside, in all those pages that tell the truth of who someone is. As summer turned to autumn, and autumn gave way to winter, something beautiful began to grow between them. Not the desperate passion of youth, but something deeper and more enduring. A partnership built on respect, kindness, and the shared understanding that life's greatest gifts often come disguised as its greatest challenges. Thomas was not a man who spoke of love in flowery words or grand gestures. Instead, he showed it in the way he always made sure Sarah Beth had the warmest seat by the fire, how he would leave wild flowers on her windowsill without saying where they came from, and how he listened to her dreams of maybe teaching the children in town to read and write. Sarah Beth, in turn, loved him with the fierce loyalty of someone who had been shown kindness when she needed it most. She saw past his quiet exterior to the generous heart beneath, appreciated his steady strength and the way he made her feel safe without making her feel small. They married on a crisp spring morning, with only the preacher and his wife as witnesses. Sarah Beth wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself, and Thomas wore his best suit, the one he had saved for special occasions that had been rare in his solitary life. The cruel sign that had once hung round her neck had long since been burned in their fireplace, its ashes scattered to the wind. In its place, Sarah Beth wore a simple gold band and a smile that lit up her entire face. Years passed, and their life together became a testament to the power of quiet love. Sarah Beth did indeed teach the local children, turning their parlor into a schoolroom 3 days a week. Thomas continued to work his land, but now he had someone to share both the burdens and the joys of each season. They never had children of their own, but their home became a refuge for others who needed shelter from life's storms. A runaway boy who stayed long enough to learn responsibility and love, an elderly woman whose own family had abandoned her, a young couple down on their luck who needed time to find their footing. You know what I've learned, Sarah Beth said one evening, many years later, as they sat on their porch watching another glorious desert sunset. Her hair was silver now, and Thomas's face was more deeply lined, but their love had only grown stronger with time. What's that? Thomas asked, reaching over to take her hand. There's no such thing as a useless mouth, she said softly. Every person has something valuable to offer, even if it's just the music of their voice or the warmth of their presence. Sometimes we just need someone to see it first. Thomas squeezed her hand gently. In the distance, a meadowlark called across the valley. its song sweet and clear in the evening air. It was the sound of home, of love that had grown slowly and surely, like the sturdy desert plants that bloom most beautifully after the harshest seasons. Asterisk, I reckon, he said quietly. The only useless thing about that whole situation was the meanness that put you there in the first place. Everything else turned out to be the biggest blessing of my life. Asterisk, Sarah Beth smiled, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Sometimes the most beautiful stories began with the darkest chapters. Sometimes the very thing that seemed like an ending was actually just the first page of a much better book. Asterisk, and sometimes, if you were very lucky, you found someone who saw your worth even when you had forgotten it yourself.